In girl world, Halloween is the one night a year when a girl can dress like a total slut and no other girls can say anything about it.
Hey everybody, I'm Nathan. 私のプレゼンテーションへようこそ。Yep, that is right. Today you are going to be indulging me in my new Japanese hyperfixation. 楽しみだな。This is how I make this presentation more interesting for myself. As you can tell, there are subtitles on this video that should be saying everything that I'm saying. And when I speak Japanese, the subtitles should be in English. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, because of course you probably won't, then the subtitle should help you out. So just bear with me in the situation and try not to cringe too much. Okay, today I'm here to discuss my poem and everything, but before we get into the specifics, 私はインドが好きかしら? I'm a nun. I'm a sexy nun. This will be important later. It's sort of a pun thing, I guess. じゃあ、誰かが何ですかと言ったら、私は何ですよと言います。何です。何です。地口みたいだよね。本当だ。語呂合わせだわ。Alright, we can stop it. That's enough Japanese for now, I guess. Or is it? Boom. Fukura chiyo ni. Sugoku kirei desu. That is my weird segue into actually getting into the video proper, I guess. So if we're getting into the poem today, I guess we first have to start with the poet herself. As described on page 173 of Women Poets from Antiquity to Now, Fukura Chiyo-ni, also known as Chiyo or Chiyo-ni, was considered the most important woman haiku composer in the classical period. What is a haiku, I may hear you asking, and what mayhaps classical period is the text talking about here? And I can answer both of those questions for you. Poetryfoundation.org describes a haiku as a Japanese verse form most often composed of 3 unrhymed lines of go, nana, go syllables, or on in Japanese. It's too complicated. We have too much to get to in this video as is. The website goes on to say that haiku most often feature images meant to depict the essence of a specific moment in time. I tried to record that line like 10 times without looking at the script. It's hard. The point I'm trying to make here is that you know them, Sokka's bad at them, we all know what haiku is. Now regarding the second question we had from the text, I'd have to sort of verbally walk you over to a description of Chiyo-ni herself to answer that one. 何を見つけようかな? That's terrible. Hey, here we are in Hakusan-shi, Ishikawa-ken. Except it's actually Matoshi. Except it's actually 1703. And actually, we're in Kagakuni. Sort of a misdirect there. Let's see if you're still with it. Kagakuni in 1703 was the birthplace of Chiyo-ni. And this is where we get into a discussion of the poet Chiyo-ni herself. In regards to the arts and poetry, Chiyo-ni was a very precocious child. Her earliest poetry can be traced back to when she would have been around 7 years old. At 12, she became an apprentice to 2 haiku poets who themselves were apprentices of Basho Matsuo-sama. Most people actually came to consider Chiyo-ni the true heir to Matsuo-sama's wisdom and legacy, like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something, I don't know. But let's hold on and rewind for a second back to Basho Matsuo. This guy was very famous. He popularized the Haikai no Renga style of poetry and was one of the most popular poets of the Edo Jidai, which just so happens to answer the second question that we had from earlier. The Edo period, stay with me, this is still about Chiyo-ni. The Edo period was a period from 1603 to 1868 that marked a shift from the more chaotic Sengoku period to what we now consider, in the West at least, to be what Japan is, I guess. This period saw a growth in strict isolationist policies, in great economic growth for a while, And most importantly for this video, it saw a rise in popularity for the arts. And this is where we finally wrap it back around to Chioni. Everybody and their mother was really getting into poetry around this time, more specifically haiku, and you have this woman who comes into the picture, not even fully a woman. She started when she was around 12, maybe even younger, and she is one of the greatest in the craft and one of the most well-known and well-regarded even today, centuries later. And part of that is due to how Chioni presented herself to the public and the views that she embodied in her poetry. So Chioni was a very modest and simple person, and her poetry reflected that. While she did write about it from time to time, love wasn't usually a theme of most of Chioni's poetry. Instead, most of her haiku are about simplicities and the banality of life that comes up in everyday interactions and conversations. And that would be a sentiment that a lot of people in the Edo period would have respected and appreciated at the time. This will be important later. Chioni would continue to write poetry until around the age of 17, when she would marry a servant of the Fukuoka family of Kanazawa, and then around a year later would give birth to his child. Sadly, this child would go on to die in infancy, and Chioni's husband, the servant of the Fukuoka family, would shortly follow the child into Yomi, not long after its death. After the death of her child and her husband, Chioni would move back to live with her parents, back in her hometown, where she continued to write her poetry. One of my favorite poems from her, Parents Older Than I, actually came from this period of her haiku. Then, after her parents' death in 1754, Chioni would go on to move out, sell her family business, and become a bikini. And you may be asking yet another question, what might a bhikkhuni be? So, in the Buddhist faith, a bhikkhuni is, can I get a drum roll please? The equivalent of a Catholic nun. Saiko desu ne. I told you that my costume would be important for later. I didn't just dress up as a sexy nun for no reason, of course. I fully did buy this costume before I knew that I was even doing this presentation, before I even knew who Chioni was, to be honest, but we don't have to focus on that part. Anyway, little digression there. Where was I? Chioni would go on to become a bhikkhuni, where she would spend the rest of her life serving our Lord and Savior. I don't really know if that's true. I'm not Buddhist. She would be a bhikkhuni, and then she passed away in 1775. And that concludes Fukara Chioni's major biography. I hope you found that interesting, I guess, or had fun. And now it's time to move on to part 2 of this video, where we analyze her most famous poem and the reason why I gave you all the background information. The poem Asagao, or Morning Glory. Let's set the scene. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. ちょっと待って. Wait. Sorry, I read the wrong poem. Let's get on with the actual haiku, which reads, Asagao ni surube torarete morai mizu, which can be generally translated to, the morning glory took the well bucket away from me. I go to the neighbor for water. This haiku describes an experience Chioni once had while going to fetch a pail of water for her daily duties. It's pictured here, and also here. In this haiku, when Chioni finds her pail, she discovers that an asagao, or morning glory, has grown over it, making it impossible for her to grab the pail without disturbing the beautiful environment. Chioni then decides that instead of disturbing the beautiful flower, she would rather go out of her way to her neighbor's house and ask for water instead. Okay, where do I even start with this one? There is a lot here for there just being 3 lines. There is a certain level of reference that may or may not have been intended when Chioni made the subject of this haiku a morning glory. Morning glories in Japanese poetry are usually seen as symbols of purity or the morality of life. In that viewpoint, the poem could be about Chioni's observed purity that comes from allowing this symbol of peace and morality to flourish and grow instead of destroying it just so she can make her duties quicker. So it was 2 a.m. when I filmed that clip, and I was very sleep deprived. What I meant to say was that morning glories are a sign of purity and the mortality of life, and that this poem would inspire Edo period women to not take for granted the power that they could find in their own purity and reverence for life. Okay, back to me being stupid. That's one perspective. The other is a sort of retroactive foreshadowing on what Chiyone's life would later become. So in Genji Monogatari, the Tale of Genji, written by Murasaki Shikibu and one of the oldest pieces of literature ever, you go girl, one of the main character Genji's cousins and love interests is Princess Asagao. If you've been keeping up at all, you'll remember that Asagao means morning glory. And interestingly enough, Princess Asagao would leave the play early to go herself become a bikuni. それは一周回ったね. If we step away from the specific imagery of the morning glory in this haiku, the affect of the Edo period and Chiyone's personality as a whole is written all over this haiku. From going so far as to leave her own residence to fetch water somewhere else, to even writing down this weird nature occurrence in the first place, is a big testament to Chiyone's calm, simplistic, and appreciative nature that she has in all of her poetry. Bear with me now, onegaishimasu. I am going to read another quote, and I'm going to be looking at my script. A collection of mindful, focused haiku, titled Haiku Mind, says it best in my opinion. Chiyone and the morning glory are the perfect identification between subject and object, seer and seen. She was not conscious of herself. Her mind was filled with the flower. And like I said earlier, the vibe that Chiyone brings to all of her haiku, all of her poetry, the vibe of reverence and appreciation for all of the little things in life, was very popular with all of her followers and all of the people in Edo period Japan as a whole. It's what made her stand out among her contemporaries and what made her so popular among them. Sentiments like the ones in Chiyone's poetry were what defined Edo period art as a whole, and Chiyone's popularity would go on to inspire and pave a way for many other Edo women to pursue artistic fields. And at the center of this inspiration, the Asagao. And in that way, you can kind of consider the Asagao and Chiyone as a figure as feminist icons of sorts. And to that, I say, you better work. Oh God, I love ending this thing with a random RuPaul quote. とてもコケだわ。